We paid the price of systematic dishonesty, institutional indifference and neglect.
Natasha Elcock and her family were some of the very last to escape Grenfell Tower. Her uncle Steve did not make it out alive.
Every single loss of life that night was avoidable.
This was at the release yesterday of the long-awaited inquiry report into the fire. But Ms Elcock has spoken to Channel 4 News about another issue, one that has been given far less attention. The health needs, both physical and mental, of the survivors, the bereaved and the local Grenfell community. Not just short-term, but long-term.
There's been some general concerns about people who have ongoing health conditions as a result of what happened that night, who were misdiagnosed, or their concerns or their issues were disregarded.
Following the inquests, the coroner said the potential impact of this disaster is very wide-ranging, with concerns over smoke and dust inhalation and potential exposure to asbestos. One report has claimed up to 12 firefighters there that night have been diagnosed with incurable cancers. Yet Miss Elcock told us that requests for blood samples to be taken from survivors and studied long-term were turned down.
Just taking a bit of blood, putting it in a fridge, and it's there then. Whenever, 10 years from now, you can go back and that was Natasha's blood, this is where it was. No, it can't happen. It's not designed like that. Fast forward a few years later, we find out the fire service have had that since 2018. The children that made it out from that building, my daughter, who knows what she inhaled, who knows what that impact will have.
The samples for the firefighters, we understand, were taken for academic research. For years, the residents of Grenfell Tower weren't listened to, and then the fire happened. And after, when it came to their health and care, they weren't listened to again. So the bereaved, the survivors, the wider community told the authorities, you have to find a different way of working. You have to listen to us, listen to our priorities, and you have to rebuild our trust. And now a report by the think tank The King's Fund, to be released on Monday, describes evidence of structural racism and discrimination before the fire and an initial response after it that was chaotic and fragmented.
There's a quote in the report that there's a Grenfell that happens every day across the country, and the only thing was different in this scenario was that there was a fire, and that speaks to deep health inequalities and sometimes public services, health and care services, that don't respond sensitively in a way that makes people feel valued and gives communities what they need.
So this is the entrance to the Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service.
Set up with the community, a response to criticism that initial mental health provision did not understand the locals' needs. An example, Muslim men sent to white female therapists and a screening program that failed to reach the people affected.
So I could say to the staff, do what you need to do, and we need to, in a sense, stop the ticking boxes in terms of screen and treat. That's not working for the moment. Let's build relationships with people so they trust us. They get to know us, they get to know you, because they're not going to be telling you about being suicidal when they don't even know who you are. And they've been through a tough time and they don't trust any statutory services because of what they've been through. So we need to build relationships first.
Annual respiratory tests and enhanced health checks are provided, although some GPs did not appear to know about them, the report says. The local NHS responded saying nearly 6,000 have been carried out since the fire, and added, we will continue to engage with survivors and bereaved and the wider community on all aspects of healthcare provision and how we provide ongoing support in the future. The report will be shared across the health and care systems with the key message: work with the community. Don't tell them what they need, ask them.
Victoria MacDonald reporting there. Well, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has vowed to put pressure on developers to speed up the removal of dangerous cladding from more than 2,000 buildings. The government has also confirmed that it has no contracts with the companies criticised in yesterday's damning report into the Grenfell fire, but at least one of them still appears to be making money from the NHS.
It was what they had known all along, but the truth in black and white in the final Grenfell report, that their loved ones should never have died, was hard to read. The damning acknowledgement too that the companies whose cladding and insulation played such a deadly role in the fire was systematically dishonest, putting profit before people. The Prime Minister yesterday pledged his government wouldn't do business with them anymore.
This government will write to all companies found by the inquiry to be part of these horrific failings as the first step to stopping them being awarded government contracts. And we will, of course, support the Metropolitan Police and the prosecutors as they complete their investigations.
But what about any contracts the condemned companies might have across the wider public sector? Our fact-check team has discovered Ryden Maintenance Limited, the main contractor on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, condemned as bearing considerable responsibility for the fire, was awarded a contract of at least £4.3 million by Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Trust in January just last year. Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership NHS Trust confirmed to us that Ryden currently do manage maintenance across its estate, but that it had strict monitoring processes in place. While the NHS and local government manage their own contracts, the government is considering issuing guidance across the public sector on this issue. The other main pledge from the government so far is to finally help the hundreds of thousands of people like Steph Pike living with unsafe cladding. She says talk of speeding up the so-called remediation programme is good, but it's action she and so many others need.
We're over 7 years after Grenfell and most buildings haven't even started remediation. So governments say one thing, and until they put that action or proper, deadlines in place, then I can't really believe what they say.
The Grenfell family say only real change across the whole industry will satisfy them, a lasting legacy for their loved ones. The pressure is on the government to deliver.
Well, earlier today, I spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, and I began by asking her what commitment she can give to the families of Grenfell victims that her government will implement the recommendations put forward in the Grenfell Inquiry's final report.
It wasn't just one part of a system, it was every single bit of the system systematically failing people. And for me, the first absolute priority of any government is to keep its citizens safe. And this is an element of that as well. And that means that we've got to do more. Those recommendations, the 58 that were part of that report yesterday, we have to look at them now, like the Prime Minister says. And those that we could do more quickly, we will, but we will look through those recommendations and do everything we possibly can to make sure that people are safe in their own homes.
I mean, you'll know that the families feel they've waited long enough and that they want these recommendations as part of the legacy of their lost ones to be implemented as soon as possible. Can you give them no timeline on that?
Whilst there has been changes that have been made, and many of those changes are to the credit of those that have bravely fought for it, for not just about what happened to themselves and their loved ones, but for people who today are still living in high-rise blocks that need this remediation work to be carried out. That change for me has not come quickly enough, in particular around remediation.
What can you tell them about how quickly you will speed things up on this remediation?
Well, first of all, there is 4,630 high-rise buildings that have been identified that need remediation, and in the 7 years since Grenfell, we have 50% of them that are in the process of remediation, with only 29% of those that have had it completed. That, to me, is incredibly slow and far too slow.
But what timeline will you give them as the new government?
I can't give a definitive timeline today. My promise to them, it will be as quickly as I can make that happen. I'm looking at all the different levers to make that happen. There is funding available. I do not accept for these building owners currently. They know that they need to do this work. Legal notices have been set out already. I will take whatever more powers and whatever more legal action that we need to take as a government to speed up this process.
Keir Starmer said yesterday that companies condemned in the report, who we heard operated a policy of systematic dishonesty, will not get future government contracts. Is that a firm commitment?
These companies that have been highlighted in the report of dishonesty, as you rightly say, this wasn't we didn't know. Some companies even being quite arrogant about their products, they shouldn't be having government contracts.
Are you aware, or are you quite confident that there are no current contracts with those companies?
I'm aware in my department that there isn't, and it's important that we look across all of the departments of government and we ensure that we don't use those companies.
If there are contracts currently being operated by these companies who've been condemned in the inquiry, should those current contracts be ended immediately?
The Prime Minister's been very clear that the government should not be doing business with people that have acted in the disgraceful way.
If there were current contracts operated by these companies,
we will be
now.
looking at those contracts and making sure that they're terminated.
The people who lived at Grenfell Tower, they told us again and again, and it was confirmed by the inquiry that they were treated as second-class citizens. I mean, you grew up in social housing yourself. Do you recognise what they said?
It made me angry that they were treated so poorly, and not only that, they were raising concerns to the tenant management organisation, which is there to be their voice, being completely dismissed. These people were treated so appallingly. That says something about what type of society we are and the stigma that we attach. And that's where we have to put a mirror up to ourselves and say about treating people with common courtesy and dignity and respect.
You're still incredibly rare to have reached this level of government and to have lived in social housing. And perhaps that's part of the problem. They understood that because they lived in social housing, because they lived in a tower block, they were expected to take what they were given and be grateful. Do you recognise that? And you recognise the need that we have to change that?
I hear that all the time. I see it on my timeline sometimes. If you look on my social media, people will say if you're an asylum seeker or if you're in social housing, well, you're getting given something, so you should just be grateful with what you're being given. People should be expected to feel safe in our country and safe in their own homes, regardless of if private tenant or regardless of in social housing. These people were absolutely failed by every institution. The fact that profit and greed and deregulation was put ahead of safety, for me, is something that has to fundamentally change.
Angela Rayner, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.